A very warm welcome to this book launch event. My name is Catherine Craig and I'm based in the School of English and Modern Languages at Oxford Brookes University. On behalf of Boiler House Press and Beyond Criticism Editions, I'd like to thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening. It's a great pleasure to welcome so many friends and collaborators and supporters. Some of our existing writers for the series are here. Thank you very much everybody for coming. It's really terrific to have you with us. Behind the scenes is our technical support for the evening, James Hatton, and I'm here to celebrate the publication of Kim Adrian's Dear Knausgaard. A very warm welcome, Kim, and very many congratulations on the publication of your book. So before we get started, I wanted to say just a little bit about the Beyond Criticism series, which has been around for some years now. We published our first 6 books in 2017 with Bloomsbury Academic, and the series subsequently moved to the independent Boiler House Press, based at the University of East Anglia. 4 further books appeared last year, and we've been really happy to continue that conversation about the interface between critical and creative thinking and critical and creative writing. And we started the tradition of informal online launch events, of which the present event is a part. So really the starting place of the series was our sense that to think critically is to think creatively, and to think creatively is also to think critically, and perhaps we've put up some artificial barriers between these two approaches. And the series began at a time when creative writing in universities had suddenly become mainstream, when literary critics and creative writers were sharing departments, sharing intellectual homes for the first time, without there really being much sense of what the shared impetus behind our work might look like. And I guess we know a lot more now. Critical creative writing is probably much better recognised, better understood as a distinct way of working. But the aim of the Beyond Criticism series is still to step into that exciting shared space and to discover new forms for new thinking about literature by developing a literary criticism that is itself literary, and maybe to even find new places where imagination and adventure can flourish. So all of our books are adventures in reading. Kim Adrian's Dear Knausgaard takes the form of a warm, witty, feminist response written in a series of letters, personal letters, to the Norwegian writer Karl Ove Knausgaard. So I must remember to tell you how you can buy the books. They're available on the Boiler House Press website, which you can find easily by typing Boiler House Press into your browser. The web page is simply boilerhouse.press. And the Beyond Criticism series is open to new submissions. So if you have an idea for a genre-defying act of critical experiment, then please do follow the submission instructions on Beyond Criticism website, which is beyondcriticism.net. And we look forward to reading your work. Okay, so allow me to introduce Kim Adrian, who joins us this evening from Boston. Kim is a highly regarded and respected writer and critic working on the thresholds of criticism and creativity. Several of her essays and short stories have been listed as notable or distinguished in anthologies such as Best American Essays and Best American Short Stories. Kim's particular area of expertise is the genre she describes as lyric criticism, and I'd love to hear more about that term, Kim, when we talk. Kim's also published a book entitled Sock in Bloomsbury's wonderful Object Lessons series, which was celebrated in the Los Angeles Review of Books as illuminating, erudite, deeply intelligent, an utterly engaging investigation, not so much of the sock per se, as of human evolution, anatomy, physics, sexuality, fashion, painting, consumerism, manufacturing, and motherhood. Kim's also written a memoir, The 27th Letter of the Alphabet, about her experience growing up with a mentally ill mother. And for this book, written in the form of a glossary, Kim became a Next Generation Indie Book Awards finalist. So Dear Knausgaard was first published by Fiction Advocate in the United States in 2020, and we're absolutely delighted that it has a home now in Beyond Criticism. It really is that most rare and wonderful thing, a radical act of reading. And the book or books that Kim is reading is the 6th-volume autobiographical novel My Struggle by the Norwegian writer Karl Ove Knausgaard. And as I said, it takes the form of a series of letters which sort of differ in tone throughout the course of the book. And as the book develops, Kim starts to interrogate, I think, the darker social and cultural forces informing Knausgaard's project. So it's a celebration of reading, without a doubt, but it also uncovers something of the intimacy, something of the difficulty, which all great literature perhaps asks of us, its readers. It's a wonderful, wonderful book, and I heartily recommend it. So over to you, Kim. I think you're going to read us some passages from your book.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for that thoughtful introduction. The letters do have different tones. I'll be reading one from the middle of the book. That's maybe where I start getting a little more, challenging Knausgaard a little bit. This is April 29th, 2019. Dear Knausgaard, I just spent the last 30 minutes watching YouTube videos of kids reacting to strange foods, natto, escargot, stargazy pie. There's a word for that in Sanskrit, prajnaparata, crimes against wisdom. It's Monday. Mondays are often hard for me to focus. I fall off the horse over the weekend, and it takes all day for me to climb back on. This past weekend, I sat at my desk just once, and that was to print out something for my father, who was in town for the day. I made him a special dinner, pasta with shrimp cooked in cream. He kept me company while I was at the stove, offering bits of unsolicited advice, more salt in the water, less cream in the sauce. It made me nervous, and the dish didn't come out as good as it usually does. On Sunday, Jonah had the flu and needed many little ministrations, while Nina, who's in college, had a minor crisis that had to be dealt with long distance. So I didn't write all weekend, which is usually the case. But I did manage to read a book, The Fifth Child by Doris Lessing. It was okay. I didn't love it. Have you by any chance read Javier Cercas's book, The Blind Spot, an essay on the novel? It came out in English translation last year. I had it on pre-order weeks before its release, on the basis of its title alone, and devoured it upon its arrival. It is a smart and graceful little book, the thesis of which argues that certain kinds of novels, those belonging to just one of the two strands that constitute, according to Milan Kundera, the bifurcated literary tradition we call the novel, can be characterized as having at their center always a blind spot. That's to say, a question, something unknown, a kind of void through which the novel pours itself, illuminating everything, every aspect of that question, that unknown thing, but without ever answering it. Blind spot novels, in other words, operate less by way of plot than of paradox. The questions these kinds of novels pose remain unanswered precisely because they are unanswerable. Or as Cercas puts it, the answer is the very quest for an answer. The question itself, the book itself, the answer is the blind spot. I liked The Blind Spot very much, and yet I also hated it. Why? Because I'm a woman, and because Cercas, although clearly an admirable thinker, is also a bit of a shit. Because of the dozens of novels he investigates to support his elegant thesis, there is not a single novel by a woman. Why? Of course, in the grand scheme of things, novels by women are still a relatively recent development. This is true as well of novels by people of color, which is to say people of non-European origin, or with some element of non-European ancestry, as the tradition of the novel has since its inception, which Cercas locates in Don Quixote, been advanced largely by men, in particular white European men, which isn't to say exclusively. Many, many women and many, many people of non-European ancestry have written astonishing novels of exactly the kind Cercas celebrates. Yet, in his discussion, He analyzes only the novels of Herman Melville, Thomas Mann, Javier Marias, Jean-Paul Sartre, J.M. Coetzee, Franz Kafka, Mario Vargas Llosa, Italo Calvino, Truman Capote. On and on goes the list. Joseph Conrad, Umberto Eco, Michel Houellebecq, Georges Perec, Ernesto Sabato, you yourself, Gustave Flaubert, Giuseppe Tomasi de Lampedusa, Hunter S. Thompson, Jorge Luis Borges, Julian Barnes, all male writers. But why? Why exclusively male writers? Don't you find it a bit strange? Even you, who have reasonably been accused of sexism in your reading habits, appreciate more female writers than zero. Even you, who, it must be said, celebrate the male lineage of the novel as a way of life, if not an actual religion, have at least dipped a toe, even your whole foot, maybe even up to your knee, in the female lineage of that same tradition. Yes, at least you, who awoke to the seduction of literature as a child through the work of Ursula K. Le Guin, understand that male writers and female writers is a bizarre and useless distinction beneath the serious consideration of any true, which is to say, open-hearted reader. And here's a quote from V.S. Naipaul. I have threaded quotes throughout the letters. This one reads, I read a piece of writing and within a paragraph or two, I know whether it is by a woman or not. I think it is unequal to me. Does Cercas suffer from the malady Francine Prose once identified as gynobibliophobia? I suspect he does. Though if I'm honest, I must admit that I too suffer from this disease. Yes, I, a woman, am afraid of women's books. This is why I picked up The Fifth Child last weekend. I've been trying to read more novels by women, more memoirs, more poetry, more essays, more short stories. Because the fact of the matter is, if I were ever to attempt to write a book about the novel, as Cercas has done, its pages would likewise be filled with the names of male novelists, simply because it is mostly male novelists I have read, and it is mostly male novelists I love, and mostly male novelists I respect and admire. I hang my head in shame sitting here at my computer as I type these words, but it's true. Am I really so lost, so disenfranchised, so confused? I'm afraid it's the case. Continued 10:40 p.m. You know, I've often wondered what it's like to be you, the person, Carlo V. Knausgaard, and not just because you're such a brilliant thinker, idiosyncratic writer, an A++ reader, but also because, in addition to these things, you are a white-skinned European male, and for this reason have not an inkling of what it's like to be in a position that's essentially adjunct to both the practice and history of literature, and beyond that, humanity itself. Here's a quote by Simone de Beauvoir. Man is defined as a human being and woman as a female. You wouldn't know this, not firsthand perhaps, not even secondhand, but the adjunct position is a deeply destructive place in which to reside. It can shrink you right up if you're not careful. And I, for one, am not always careful. Though back in college, I was vigilant. For example, in every textbook I read, in every course packet I received, wherever the word man was used to indicate not a male of my own species, but a human being, I carefully prefaced it with the letters HU. I likewise altered every he, where it was meant to indicate a person of either sex, by placing an S/ in front of it. And mankind under my pencil became always humankind. I made these edits not as a political statement, but only in order to get through whatever I was reading, because my brain simply wouldn't allow free passage to words like man and he when they indicated or tried to indicate a human being. My female brain in my female body bristled at such gender neutral usage because it didn't feel neutral at all. It felt quite partisan. It made me feel subsumed, invisible, negligible. And these feelings stoppered the reading process. In short, I made my edits simply in order to be able to read the work. It took a lot of time. Here's a quote by Louise Bourgeois. The spider is a repairer. If you bash into the web of a spider, she doesn't get mad. She weaves and repairs it. As I grew more fully into adulthood, I stopped repairing the texts I read. I figured I had better things to do. After all, everyone knows exactly what a statement like "one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind" is supposed to mean, right? Why bushwhack my way through such an endless, ever-renewing onslaught of grammatical negation? Because once you start looking for these types of things, they crop up everywhere. I eventually trained myself to remain unfazed whenever I encountered this kind of language. In fact, I even took pride in gliding past it, took it as a sign of my own maturity. It's only now, mature indeed, only now, with a daughter entering her 20s, that I realized this was actually a serious mistake. Continued after happily discovering a sleeve of ginger snaps at the back of the bread box. Speaking of mistakes, there's a passage early on in book 2 that's so smug, so macho in a literary way, that's so, I can't explain it. It's almost as if language repels this feeling, the one that comes over me whenever I read something like this. All you're trying to do in this passage is one of your favorite bad boy tricks, an anti-PC rant that in this case attempts to flip the conventional nature versus nurture argument on its head. But it's also testosterone-y and white. You don't really have a leg to stand on, and yet you don't even know it. You begin by invoking the name Ingmar Bergman via the Swedish critic Sven Stolpe, via your best friend and daily conversational partner, Ger Angel. When you inform the reader that he, Bergman, once claimed that he would have been Bergman irrespective of where he had grown up. A page later, you raise the name of another Scandinavian great, Dag Solstad, whose literary style, as you describe it, is inimitable and full of elan and cannot be learned nor bought for money. The idea being that Solstad's style should be taken as clear evidence of the ineffable individual essence with which each of us is endowed at birth. Your contention, ultimately, is that men like Bergman and Solstad were born geniuses and would have become exactly what we now know them to be, no matter how or where or under what kind of hegemonic conditions their lives might have otherwise unfolded. You end with this. It is not the case that we are born equal and that the conditions of life makes our lives unequal. It is the opposite. We are born unequal and the conditions of life make our lives more equal. What I want to know is, are you for real? I don't mean this sarcastically. I really want to know, is this really what you think? I mean, don't you ever look down at your own hands as they play across the keyboard? Clackety clack, your own meaty, white, maybe hairy, who knows, probably soft hands and wonder, just a little. In irritation, Kim Adrian.
Thank you so much, Kim. I was so excited to find out which passages of your book you were going to read. And I'm really interested in the choices that you made. Wonderful, wonderful passages. Can I ask you whether you would like Knausgaard to read the book, or whether he has read the book? Because a lot of what you're doing in the book, I think, is sort of thinking about Knausgaard and thinking about an ego, and a person of a tremendous sort of sense of himself as a performer and a person. And I just wondered whether you've sent him a copy, or whether he's read it.
I have no idea if he's read it. I know that the editor at Boiler House sent it to him, I think. That's what I've heard. So I don't know. Yeah. I mean, he kind of is known for refusing to read any criticism or reviews of his own work. So I don't really expect him to read it. But on the other hand, I kind of think it might be hard not to read a book that's dear you. So I don't know.
Yeah, brilliant. And I was struck by something that you wrote towards the start of your book, that for you, the act of reading is different for you now than it was before you read My Struggle, and so is the act of writing. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that this book, the series of books, has been so important for you that it's affected the very act of reading and the act of writing. I wonder if you could say a bit more about that.
I think for Knausgaard, and I was a little hesitant to pick that passage because it is one where I'm sort of attacking him more than celebrating him. But I do celebrate him quite a bit in this book. But for Knausgaard, literature, my feeling about what he's saying about literature is that it's this incredibly pure meeting ground of minds. And it's a place where, and especially for him and his project, like the voice is primary. So this thing that comes from deep within gets expressed on the page, and then it's sort of imbibed by a reader, a careful reader maybe, but so it's this intense sense of communion. I think the act of reading as an act of communion, which is something I'd always appreciated for sure, but I think reading him and reading somebody think about that so carefully just intensified those feelings for me. And then as far as the writing goes, he writes so explicitly about his own desires as a writer, to write something really great. And that gets complicated, but where I find it most admirable is when he's talking about writing something really pure, something that's really reflective of reality as he is able to perceive it. I mean, we're each limited by our own, position in space and time, our own bodies, whatever. But yeah, I found that really inspiring.
Great, thank you. And you've written in the past about domesticity, and Knausgaard often writes about the domestic. I was struck by some of the quotations in the book where he's sort of cataloguing in great detail this domestic experience, or the experience of eating something. And I found that in your book as well, that there's some sense of domestic background, or you mentioned the ginger snaps in the passage that you just read out. And I wondered if you could say a bit about the relationship between the domestic and the experience of writing and reading. How do these two things work together, either for you or for Knausgaard?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting and complex question. I think that the domestic has been the realm traditionally that we think of as, we associate with women, obviously, and children, and it's not a place of adventure. And Knausgaard, often talks about, like, what am I doing? If I can paraphrase him, not in his tone at all, but like, what am I doing trying to write a novel about, being a dad, basically changing diapers. And like, he feels that limitation in his own life of not living a life of adventure. And, I know specifically at one point he compares his life to his best friend, Garangel, and who seeks out adventure in a different way. And so, I think that's always been a challenge for women, and certainly for Knausgaard, like, how do you create literature out of the stuff of the home? And how different does it need to be? And why has it been neglected? And why has it been thought of as less important than, adventure-based kinds of stories?
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Kim. It seems that Knausgaard has no sort of shame filter, that he writes it all out quite consciously, as you put it, refusing to let it filter through the membrane of shame. I like that that phrase. That's a very lyrical phrase, the membrane of shame. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that, perhaps, that experience of, I don't know, of embarrassment, shame, how to write about it, how to capture it, whether it's an aspect of reading or a subject that interests you.
I mean, that's really Knausgaard's thing, like shame. He forces himself, I think, in my struggle to bypass shame. Like that's his challenge to himself. And that's what, when he takes that filter away, there's just this incredible sense of honesty and urgency that comes through, that I think is why he's, that work is so beloved of so many readers, because it feels so honest. And I think that people who have a special relationship, should we call it, with shame, who suffer with it a lot, which I think I have, which I write about more personally in my memoir, but that it's very interesting to see that happen. But he works out a very interesting relationship between shame and literature, and that literature is one of the only places that we can or writing is where we can bypass shame, because it's such a personal thing that you do basically alone, although you're communicating with other people ultimately.
Okay, folks, I think let's draw our proceedings to a close this evening. So it just remains for me to thank Adrian very much for reading from your book and from kindly answering my questions and questions from our audience. It's been absolutely terrific to meet you. And I'd like to thank James Hatton very much, who has been behind the scenes supporting us. Thank you so much, James. Thanks very much to Nathan Hamilton as well at Boiler House Press. So I'm going to draw the proceedings to a close, as I say, and to thank you very much to our audience for attending. And we'll hope to see you at our next launch event.